organization that's 130,000 people strong. We're part of the Dream Corps. That's our like parent organization, which pretty much works to close prison doors while opening doors of opportunity. That's our mission, right? And we're actually really committed to revolutionary love. And what that means is a love first and foremost for ourselves, right? You gotta love yourself. You gotta know you got this, you know, you got this life, this precious life that we're here to live. Also, love for others is really important, right? And that's what today is about, a day of empathy, love for our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our community, our city, right? Roxbury, where you at, right? In our country, all of those good things. Also, love for our opponents. That's where it gets a little tricky, right? Our opponents, that's kind of like on a higher spiritual plane. But that's what Cut 50 does, right? That's what Van Jones does, Lewis Reed does. Cut 50's out there reaching across the aisle and really trying to connect with some of those folks that sometimes like, I really want to work with them, but I have to, right, for the sake of our people, and that's why we go for it. So I had a long spiel about how this connects with me, right, as a man of color, as a black man of color, right, of Cape Verdean ethnicity. Obviously, we had run-ins with the law so many times, but I think about how I was able to navigate that because of basically the blessings that I had. I had family, right? So when I survived the police attack and didn't die, because I could have died, and all the charges got put on me, I had family to support me, right? What about the brothers and sisters that don't have family, right? I had a knowledge, because I went to UMass Amherst and got a degree in legal studies, right? So what about the brothers and sisters that don't have that knowledge to know that we can actually navigate through this and we're going to be all right? And even though they're trying to label me as a criminal, I'm more than that. I'm bigger than that, right? And I also had resources. Right? I could get that personal loan, you know, because I was able to get the lawyer that cost 10 G's. You know, I called him my Puerto Rican Johnny Cochran, right? And I had to pay him that dough for me to be free. And all the charges got dropped. What about the people who don't have that? Right? So today on the Day of Empathy, that's what I'm thinking about. So when I say day of, you say empathy. Day of empathy. Day of empathy. When I say lift your, you say voice. Lift your voice. Lift your voice. When I say day of, you say empathy. Day of empathy. Day of empathy. When I say lift your, you say voice. Lift your 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 voice. I love y'all, y'all. Peace.
How many of you are familiar with the organization Cut 50? Are. Okay? So Cut 50 is a bipartisan organization. They're an organization that focuses on policy around criminal justice reform. Their mission is to help to decrease mass incarceration by 50% within a 10-year period, and also to decrease the amount of people going into the system by 50% in a 10-year period as well. I'm going to actually now introduce Liz Miranda, our state rep, and for her to talk about
Well, good evening, everybody. It's really interesting to be on this side of things. And I'm still 8 weeks into the Massachusetts House of Representatives, which is an important place for people like me to be. I just want to start out by saying thank you. There are many people in this room that helped put me in office, and I want to say that it's meant a lot to me, particularly in the last 8 weeks, being in the House of Representatives, which only has 3 black women out of 200 seats in the Mass legislature, both in the House and the Senate. So I am literally in a place where we are not represented. I also come from a background where all my siblings and my father were incarcerated. I currently have a brother who is serving 20 years. I have a brother who was deported. I have a father who was deported. And 17 months ago, my youngest brother was murdered in Boston's Theater District. So I bring that to this work. And so it's really important that I'm in the State House because I understand what it's like. I've never been to jail, but I know what it's like to write jail letters. I know what it's like. I just watched If Beale Street Could Talk, and there's this one line that had me in tears, which it said that I hope that no one has to ever speak to someone you love behind glass. And at that moment, watching that film, I thought it was going to be a love story, but it was a lot about criminal justice. In that movie, really profoundly remembered visiting my youngest brother in jail at Suffolk House of Corrections and being in a room, and it was a room, and so I thought I could be able to see him and touch him, but I had to look at him behind glass. So being an activist, not a lot of activists get to become political elected leaders, and what's important about that is that we actually get to be in the spaces where we are writing the laws, or we're confronting the laws, or changing policies with systems that really have disenfranchised our communities. I came from the Dudley Street neighborhood, and I remember distinctively in high school telling someone I lived on Woodward Ave, and the officer saying to me that that was the most dangerous street in Roxbury, and me saying to him, how? Like, there's only 8 houses, right? I was like, there's 8 houses, Nana's house, we got smoke, you know what I mean? Like, and it was profound because here I was, a student at the John D. O'Brien School of Math and Science. I had gone through all this stuff in my community, but I was trying to succeed, thank you, trying to succeed and being told by someone that was meant to protect and serve me that already I was from a bad community, a bad street. I was Cape Verdean, and at the time, in the late 90s, we were sadly starting an assault on ourselves, and I was getting reminded by that every day, right? And so I am a member of the Criminal Justice Caucus. In my first 2 weeks in the State House, already filed and co-filed at least 6 bills, ending life without parole, working on juvenile justice. Thank you. Re-entry, criminal justice reform, there was a massive bill passed last year, and part of it coming into the State House this year is really profound because when you pass bills, they have to get implemented, right? And so I find myself in a really interesting position where not only do I get to ensure that folks are implementing the things that we passed, because as you know, just because something gets passed, it feels like it's 1808, like, the countryside still didn't get the memo. But part of that implementation is remembering all the stuff that didn't make it into the bill. So I pushed forward some bills around Class B trafficking that didn't make it to the bill. There's a lot of things that didn't make it into that great criminal justice reform bill. And elevating voices that are not often heard, particularly women involved in the justice system. I have never been incarcerated. I know plenty of women who have, but it's important, particularly as a Black woman, to say that while I'm at the State House, I speak for all women, and not just for women that are college educated, not just women that are fighting for pay equity, but women who have been abused, or women who have been killed, or women who have made it into our justice system. So today I'm here, the day of empathy, because it's important that people know that I will be a champion for my people. And that means that all of us play different positions, but in the position that I play is hopefully encouraging people like yourselves to be able to advocate women like me at the state government level, to be able to make sure that we pass the right laws, and if there are laws on the books that are not working for us, that we help to strike them from our books. So thank you.
All right.
Okay, next we have James Mackey, who is the founder of Stuck on Replay. And James, I'm going to let you speak a bit about your work.
Yeah, so I do a lot of stuff, man. I care about Black and brown people. So if there's any issue, policy that is affecting Black and brown people, I'm not afraid to tackle it. I'm not afraid to really organize our people around it, because for far too long we have been taken advantage of, and it's time for us to do something about it, or we as a people, as a culture, will remain stuck on replay. And so with that being said, what I've done, I've been able to really organize people that look like you and I in this space to really understand that process of what was taking place in Massachusetts around the criminal law system that has been affecting our people. And I was able to galvanize numerous young people from across the state, numerous community members from across the state. And we've probably hosted over the past year or 2 years, I think we've hosted, in partnership with numerous organizations, around 30 events, and have interacted with over 3,000 community members throughout the state, along with, I think we've had over 250 video testimonies of people who have been formerly incarcerated, have had family members that have been incarcerated, or have had no incarceration experience at all, but know someone that has been incarcerated, and have shared how has the criminal injustice system affected them, their family, and their community. And it was all about visibility for the community, and for us to really have that voice, because for far too long, again, you have people that are in the State House who says that this is your house, but still they are creating laws, policies, and practices that are implemented that continue to disenfranchise and rip apart our people. So with that being said, my role as a facilitator, as an organizer, as a revolutionary, as an abolitionist, is to make sure that we learn about the process, we understand what's going on, and so we can challenge any of these racist, structural institutions that continue to take advantage of black and brown bodies. So with that being said,
And then we have Gabrielle Priest, the Director of Implementation and Development at CRJ, which is
Community Resources for Justice.
Yes, Community Resources for Justice. I'm sorry, I get CRJ and CFJJ.
We love acronyms for criminal justice.
To get our acronyms.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I've been at Community Resources for Justice for almost 10 years now. I studied
name again? Sorry.
Gabriella Priest. I studied criminal justice and came into this work because my brother was in the juvenile justice system, and I saw how hard it was once he got in the system for him to get out. I saw how tough it was for him to have his substance use needs addressed. I saw how tough it was for him to have his mental health needs addressed. With all the support he had from my family and all the advantages and privileges that he had, it still was really, really difficult. And so seeing that growing up, and through my teenage years, I decided I wanted to focus on criminal justice. Went to Suffolk and got my master's there, and then ever since really have been working with Community Resources for Justice. So my first several years with CRJ, I worked with our Crime and Justice Institute that does policy work around the country to reform criminal and juvenile justice systems. So I worked in 6 different states that passed legislation similar to what Massachusetts passed last year, focused on both reducing incarceration in general and then improving criminal and juvenile justice systems. And then 2 years ago, I came over to our direct services side. So I now work with CRJ's reentry programs, Brook House and Coolidge House. Some of you may have heard those programs before. They're programs for people that are leaving incarceration to help provide them housing and intensive case management to give them the support they need to make their transition home a little bit easier. So I've been doing that work for a couple years now, and I'm here to talk about that with you all tonight. So thank you for coming tonight. Awesome.
Okay, next we have Saina Fidel. Did I say that correctly? She is Deputy Director at CFJJ, which is Citizens for Juvenile Justice. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Great, thank you all for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I want to start off by Citizens for Juvenile Justice. We are a statewide advocacy organization working on improving the experiences of young people who are involved in the juvenile justice system or at risk of involvement or exiting the juvenile justice system. We do mostly policy and research, and a lot of the work that we do is identifying what are best practices, what's happening in Massachusetts, and how can we reform the system, and mostly at the State House or with system leaders. So with that intro, how many of you are actually aware that in April we passed major criminal justice reform? So, sorry. So this is actually a pretty big deal. The last time we had something so huge was 2 decades ago. That was in the mid-90s. For those of us aware of the mid-90s, some of you are younger, that was when we were looking at there's a lot of brown and black kids in America, and their numbers are going to grow, and these are all super predators. They're different, they're violent. So we need to do something that, yes, I should say this, that we need to make the system hard. You know, adult time, adult crime, and a lot of the harsh sentencing that happened at the federal level came to Massachusetts. That's actually the birth of CFJJ, and we're like, stop. Young people have to be treated developmentally appropriate. We actually wanted to do a lot of protections to keep young people's, who are justice system involved, have those protections around them. So the fact that we had comprehensive criminal justice reform happen is pretty significant. I'm going to highlight a few things that we did for young people. Because a lot of conversation about is mass incarceration. Most people don't talk that kids are snagged into that system. And for us, mass incarceration isn't just being locked behind doors. You can be locked in your community. If the state controls your life and has supervision of your life, that is still part of the system, and we want to reduce that in our communities. So, for example, one of the things that this law did, as of July, you can no longer arrest 7-year-olds. We could do that before. We raised that lower age from 7 to 12. We also were able to say, like, there's some things that are so low level that you cannot arrest these kids for first-time offenses. Let's say trespass, or there's a few things, if you're driving a scooter without a license, if it's the first time you do this, you cannot be arrested for it. And we also gave judges an ability to divert cases before they get a court record, the CORI for these kids. With those 3 alone, the juvenile caseload in Massachusetts has dropped by 40% in just 3 months. But there's a few things that haven't changed yet. This is why we're here, because we want to make sure we're not done yet. Representative Miranda talked about some things. I want to mention 3 things that we're still working on. One is Massachusetts. We're progressive, we're liberal. All of you know this, but one of the biggest things one of our darkest secrets is we have the 4th worst racial inequity in the juvenile justice system in the country. And can
you say that again?
We have the 4th worst racial inequity in the juvenile justice system in America. And there are active forces working to prevent that information from coming out. We have been fighting for legislation to bring this data out into the public, and every time we try to push for it, we are told, no, we can't. We can fix racial inequities. Just we'll take care of it ourselves. And every year we get pushed back that we cannot have something as basic as data. So one of our major bills is about having juvenile justice data, and I tell many of our allies, it's really hard to talk about we need data. But you know what? If you don't have the data, you don't have a problem. And that's how you fix racial inequities in our justice system. And that's what we're saying we can't do. So that's one of the things we're looking at is we've been fighting this fight for 12 years. And we're going to continue fighting on it. Another thing we're working on is for young people who are transition age youth, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. If you get in trouble with the law at that age, you get arrested, your name is in the paper, your court record is public, you get incarcerated in a jail or prison. When you come out, everybody knows you. You've been, like you said, you've been labeled. Also, and if you're involved, nobody's really saying, well, what do you need to do better? The focus is that you have done something wrong. How far can we punish you? She said, and one of the things we're saying is for young people who are starting out into adulthood, if this is how they start off, you're actually setting them up to fail, and it's much, much harder to bring them up to succeed when the system is saying, we're going to suppress anything that's going to help you develop into a successful adult. So another thing we're working on is we're calling a Raise the Age campaign. So that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds will be, if they are involved in the justice system, they would be under the jurisdiction of the juvenile system rather than the adult system. If you want to have high school seniors treated like high school juniors, you move them into the juvenile justice system to focus and work on whatever it is you want to work on under the confidentiality and with the focus on rehabilitation. And then, are you going to talk about expungement? All right, and then we're working with our partners at Act Future, and will we have a chance to talk about Give Action?
Yes, absolutely.
I have homework for all of you.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Thank you. All right, next we have Nicole Agusta.
Yeah.
Did I say that properly? She's a representative from I Have a Future, which which is a youth organization that focuses on employment for youth in the city. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we do a little bit more than that. And so can I just start by everybody take a deep breath with me? I feel a lot of energy in this room. Let's take a deep breath and out. And when I say youth, you say power. Youth.
Power.
Youth.
Power.
So I Have a Future is a statewide community coalition of youth and allies building power to improve youth employment across the state and also make sure that youth are not criminalized in our state. And so we began in 2009 just focusing on youth employment levels in the state of Massachusetts. They were at their lowest. And young people got together and said, we need to do something about this. We cannot continue to be excluded out of Massachusetts' growing economy, right? And so they came together and they formed this coalition. Over the years, we've been able to not only reach quality funding levels for youth employment through the YouthWorks line item, but we've also been able to get forward funding. We've been able to build relationships with private sector companies to make sure that they're also including young people. Now, in 2014, we decided that we needed to do more, right? Young people are impacted by so many things other than employment, and that's when we shifted and became I Have a Future. I Have a Future, our demand is to end the way youth are criminalized. Young people are being blocked from opportunities and not being able to put in positions to be successful. And so we work with many of our allies in this room, Stuck on Replay, CFJJ, I see Mission Safe in the house. And we've come together to really build relationships, develop young leaders, and really take authority and change our communities. Actually, this past month, we organized our annual Youth Justice Rally where over 300 youth came out to advocate for youth jobs funding and juvenile justice issues. Representative Miranda came and showed out, and I see many of the folks in the audience today. And just shout out to my crew in the back. Those are the young faces that are really leading the work. So I've been doing this work since I was 14. I'm in college now, and really my job is to make sure that there are pathways for them. So yeah, some of the initiatives that we're currently working on is raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction. We're also trying to remove the eligibility factors that hinder more young people to be included in juvenile expungement, and many more. So yeah, that's a little spiel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Next we have Ayana Albert from Sisters Unchained. So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Hi everybody, my name's Ayana and I'm part of Sisters Unchained, and we're basically a community organization for young women with incarcerated or formerly incarcerated parents, and as a result, people who have like just incarcerated loved ones in general. And it started actually in 2015 by a woman named Andrea James when she was in Danbury, Connecticut Federal Prison, and she was she was locked up and around other incarcerated women, and they were just expressing the need to address our daughters and our children in general who have to deal with the traumas of separation while we're in here. And we all know that when our family members are incarcerated, it really punishes us. So 1 in 2 women in this country have an incarcerated loved one, and specifically in Boston, 1 in 20 children have experienced parental incarceration. So it's really affecting and ripping apart our communities. Like the criminal legal system is, we already know it comes from slavery, and so these patterns of breaking up the family definitely breaks up our communities. So it does take a village for us to step in where the system fails us, and that's really the role of Sisters Unchained. We're an affinity group, again, for youth with incarcerated parents. And we're trying to just educate ourselves, about the lineage of Black women and our contributions to the trajectory of freedom in this country, and then also just love up on ourselves. I don't know, we really stress radical education. My role is creating the curriculum and things like that. But if you hear from our young women, I think the main thing that they get from this program is self-love and just really accepting and owning our blackness, and I think that's one of the most revolutionary things that we can do. Yeah, my father was incarcerated for 17 years, so this work is deeply personal, as it is for a lot of people in this room. So I'm really excited to be here today. Some of the initiatives that we've done in the past is primary caretakers. So basically, that actually snuck into the big criminal justice reform bill. I don't really know how, because it's low key kind of radical, but basically, like,
It was not low key. It was, if I can, it was amazing advocacy by people. I mean, it was definitely bipartisan. The only thing that was bipartisan.
Yeah, definitely. So like, basically, it was drafted by formerly incarcerated women, and basically the bill states that if you're a primary caretaker of your child, whether violent offense or non-violent offense, your lawyer could submit a motion to the judge, and the judge has to write a written finding, basically why this person should receive community alternatives. So basically, the idea of the bill is to keep our parents within the communities. And so what we're doing right now is like training lawyers across Suffolk, Plymouth, like all the counties basically in Massachusetts, so that they're armed with this tool to like really better advocate for our parents. And then, I don't know, we just like plug into different initiatives here and there. So there's like one coming up right now that's led by people incarcerated, and we're trying to restore the right to vote for incarcerated people in Massachusetts. So they had the right to vote, and then it was stripped away in the early 2000s. So, you know, voting is, you know, could be controversial. Some people believe in it, some people don't. But the reality is, in our country, that like, I don't know, our humanity is sad. It's kind of based on what rights we have. So when they strip it away from us, it's a way of like taking away our humanity. So, you know, that's how they disenfranchise our people time and time again. And, you know, that's what the voices from the inside really want, is like, you know, the right to vote, to like make changes.
Alright, thank you for that. And so just to let you know a little bit about myself, I'm from Boston. I grew up in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. All of my life I moved around in different areas. I attended John D. O'Brien. And the reason that I'm passionate about this cause, the reason that I'm passionate about criminal justice reform, is actually because this gentleman on the phone by the window over there is my uncle. And in 2017, December of 2017, he came home from doing 23 and a half years in federal prison. And it's encouraging to hear you talk about your involvement in this work at such a young age. When I was your age, and when I was even younger, I never knew what organizations to get involved in my community. And so I'm very happy to be able to facilitate this and to have you guys come out so that you can see what initiatives are taking place, so that you can hear from organizations that are backing you, that are supporting you, and that want change. So I'm gonna jump into some of the questions because we are extremely behind this evening. But I just wanna allow the panelists to talk about what empathy means to you. We'll start with Liz.
I think it's three parts to me. Part of being a woman legislator is that I tell people a lot that I lead with my heart. And that's important because a lot of the work that we do has to come from a place of compassion. So I look at empathy as awareness. Sometimes you can understand what someone is going through, you empathize with them. Sometimes your empathy draws you to act. So very social, like I know that I want to do something about this. So empathy can be an action word. Like empathizing doesn't mean that I just understand what James is going through. Because I understand that I'm urged to act. And so I think that when I looked at the Day of Empathy as a potential opportunity for me to come speak, I thought about it as a way to encourage people to know that we care a lot about things, but actually driving ourselves to act and the act of compassion is a really powerful thing. And so that's what I think about when I think of empathy.
Yeah, so I actually looked up the word empathy yesterday, and it states that, I forgot, hold on, I think, no, it's the ability to understand and feel what others are going through. And And so, with that being said, when you think about empathy, I think that it's more than just like, like just going off of what Rep Liz was talking about. It's more than just understanding and feeling, but like, are we being proactively engaged in doing something about it? And so that's where Stuck on Replay really sprung out. So, back in 2016 and, February, there was an event that was taking place talking about, young people taking a development approach within the criminal injustice system. And I went to this event, and there was a whole bunch of white people in this space. And in that moment, I realized that it really made me upset that we talking about young people, knowing that most of the young people that are incarcerated in Massachusetts are young people of color. And so I did something about it. And the reason why I did something about it, because I know a lot of those young people that are incarcerated. That's like my little brother that's incarcerated. That's just like my little cousin that's incarcerated. And so it was more than just empathy and sympathy and a feeling for me. Like, I had to act on it, because if I didn't, it would have hurt me internally. And so I had to take action. So really, understanding that, yeah, you have empathy for folks, but really taking action is, so it doesn't hurt your internal self, knowing that there's a lot of wrong that's being done to people.
Yeah, I think of it as really putting yourself in someone else's shoes, even if, and this is the really important part, I think, even if you've never been in their shoes, right? You might not have faced somebody's same situation, but being able to listen and think about the feelings behind it, right? Because you felt those feelings. You felt hopeless at times. You felt upset. You felt wrong, right? So even if you haven't been in the situation that somebody's in, you can identify with their feelings, and you can understand, and you can listen to them, right? And you can hear what they're going through, and then you can help them in terms of next steps. So that's what I think of when I think of empathy.
So one thing that the juvenile justice system says by law is that if a young person offends, the state is supposed to treat them the way as close to a parent as possible. And I take that very personally. So when I do advocacy to try to get, get kids as much help as possible, try to keep them out of the system as much as possible. But we also, so some of those kids do something really stupid, and it's like, no, they don't belong there. And some do some really serious things. And I'm always asking, when I say this, when we advocate and say this is what we need to do, I ask myself two questions. If my son was the one who did this, is this what I would be asking? Second question is, if this happened to my son, would I still be doing this? I ask this question to myself like practically every single day, because it's always something that there's both sides to everything, and you have to know that anything we advocate for has a direct impact on many, many people.
For me, I think of my cousin, Michael. His name is Michael Whitmore. He's a singer, he's a poet, he's super energetic, and unfortunately, he's incarcerated. He has been locked up since he was 18, and he is 34 years old now. I'm actually going to be seeing him for the first time next week, Monday, right? And I'm like the only of my family members to go see him. And so, yeah, I think about like his situation and how like many folks who unfortunately can resonate are often having to redeem themselves, and often having to always being branded. We were having a conversation the other day. He was like, hey, if I took a look at my rap sheet, and man, listen, like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna get out, right? And I told him, I was like, why do you have to be branded, right? There are so many folks that have paid their debts to society, and yet they are constantly having to prove that, right? And not being seen for who they are. And so that's what empathy means to me, like the actual ability, the chance, the opportunity to be who you are, and not be labeled or branded for the rest of your life for the mistakes that you've made.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Katora said, I agree. I feel like empathy is basically like understanding how complicated the truth is, and like So like a story, I'm not gonna go too in depth with the time, but just a lot of stories. I don't know if you guys heard of Survived and Punished, but that network. There's a story that of a well, she's not young anymore, but she was young. Her name is Kenya, and our organization, Families for Justice at Healing, we're trying to work on freeing her or whatever. She's currently incarcerated in Framingham. And I bring her story up just because like she is a survivor of sexual violence when she was young, and the criminal legal system, helped prosecuted that person, individual, because one may argue that they were empathetic for this young girl. And then fast forward, in her 20s, she finds herself in another situation where she's like fighting off being assaulted, and she had to defend herself, and that resulted in violence, and so now she's incarcerated. And it's just like, I don't know, just trying to measure empathy. It's like when, I don't know, the system is crazy because it's like, I just feel like what is, like, I feel like they think, I don't know, it's just crazy how like you could try to prosecute an individual or whatever, off the idea that like you're bringing justice or whatever, but I feel like they're more focused on like conviction, so it's not really coming from a place of like healing for the survivor or like really like trying to bring justice. If you fast forward years later, and that same survivor is being locked up right now. So I think empathy is just trying to like understand the reasons for why people do things, and like not punishing people, but just just trying to like help each other out, and just like not punish people for like behaviors that like the law and like the dominant culture declares as like criminal. So it's just really looking like I said earlier, just like the truth is really much more complicated, and like really seeing each other and listening, and yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So what is one thing, the next question is, what is one thing that your organization does exceedingly well? If you want to start and then go back down.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Well, I guess one thing that we do exceedingly well is just like creative expression, and just like telling stories, I think. We've created a documentary called Eternally Misunderstood, and like we were able to like really just create that space, because I feel like us as children with incarcerated parents, like we don't really have like people don't provide us with the tools and resources to like process our feelings and like questions for like having an incarcerated parent. And then furthermore, like when the topic comes up, we're kind of met either with like silence or judgment, and like also we're just not a part of like that political process, or even the process when our loved ones are being like prosecuted. We're just like behind the scenes and not thought about or considered. So definitely I feel like movements aren't anything without stories. Like they're very meaningful, and so with the documentary we definitely try to just encourage like creative expression, and just like really just sharing our truths. And then we also did like a art exhibit called Inferno. We worked with people inside. So just like, yeah, the base of it is just like artistic expression. Yeah.
So one thing that I Have a Future does well, I would say, is our ability to leverage power. So we activate young people on a local level so that they in turn can develop the strategies to move the state. And I think that's pretty damn powerful. So like we also believe that the voices of those most vulnerable or affected by the issues are front and center. And so that is the only way that we are going to make change. And I think, I know that is one thing that I Have a Future does really well.
Awesome, thank you.
So I like to say that CFJJ, we pride ourselves in being the nerds of the revolution. We are, we like to use data and research and numbers and facts to make the case. We also work with, a lot of the work we do is in coalition. So what we try to do is say, okay, everybody else, you guys have the passion, you have the experience, you have sort of the ground experience. all we do is say, okay, how can we organize as organizations? Individuals, we would go out and say, you care about this issue, I care about it, but how do you translate it from my own passion to I'm actually going to influence legislation? We do trainings on that. So that's where our nerdiness comes in.
So at CRJ, we support people during a really challenging time in their lives to assist them to be successful. And I think, we talk a lot about kind of what leads to incarceration, and then the reentry part of the system. And Bruce Weston, the sociologist who worked on the Boston reentry study several years ago, talked about how not only does incarceration not solve any of the problems which might have led people there, but then it creates a new one. So prior to incarceration, people experience poverty, they have economic disparities, they have health issues, both physical and mental health. They have exposure to trauma and violence. Those things are not helped during incarceration. In fact, a lot of times they're exacerbated. And then there's this new problem of reentry, right? Now they have a criminal record. Now they have the record on their quarry when they're going to look for employment. Now they have, housing that was disrupted during their incarceration. And they don't have the continuum of care for their health care. And so this new problem has been created when someone exits incarceration. And just even starting with the housing. I was at a jail recently, and there were about 40 gentlemen there that were leaving in 30 to 60 days, I think was the audience. And when they were asked who has housing that they can go to right now, 5 people of the 40 raised their hand. And they said, who doesn't know what their housing plan is when they release? And 35 of the individuals raised their hand. So starting with the housing and being able to support individuals there, but then to really go beyond that and to say, what are your needs? What are the barriers that you face? And how can we help you with those? And not just do things for you, right? But actually help you to be able to achieve things on your own. And it's really sad how often we're told that, you're the only one that's told me that I did something right, or you're the only one that's tried to support me or help me or point me in the right direction. That's really sad that comes from a program. But at the same time, I think, we do that work really well, and we help individuals realize the strengths that they have and the skills that they have, and to be able to be successful on their own in the community.
Yeah, so for Stuck on Replay, our goal is to elevate voices, uplift community, and influencing policymakers to make the right decision around policies that are affecting those that are affected by that policy. But we also want to challenge legislators and policymakers and push back on whatever it is that they're pushing forward, or policies or practices that they're doing. And this is not with just legislators, this is with institutions, organizations. If there's anything that I feel like you're being disenfranchising Black and brown people, I'm challenging. And that's just what it is. And for one, I would just say that I don't think that it should be called the criminal justice system. Let's just start there. But in general, I work with brothers that are behind the walls. I got a brother named Fuquan that is a phenomenal brother that's been incarcerated for more than half of his life. And he has organized brothers that are out now that were formerly incarcerated that are doing phenomenal work in the community right now. I got a brother right here, Dom, who's one of the brothers. Can you raise your hand, Dom? It's my brother right here that's really doing phenomenal work in the community and really elevating our young brothers and sisters out here. But the key thing is being able to engage the community. So Stuck on Replay is not about me just coming up with creative and innovative ways to really inform community. It's about, okay, what is at hand, what is at stake, and how can the community as a collective come together and truly inform the community around the issues that are affecting them. And I've been able to do that fairly well. And I wouldn't say just I, but I would say we have been able to do that fairly well.
So I'm going to talk about the State House. And I think what they do exceedingly well is keeping this dominant power structure going on since the 1600s. So it's not a good thing. And when you look at representation, there have been 210 women in our Massachusetts legislature, while there have been 20,000 men. When we look at the people of color in its entire history of 300 plus years, probably less than 40. I heard today someone said, she meant well, but she was like, in 1999 when I came into the Mass House of Reps, that's when the first Latinos were elected to office. And I thought to myself, 1999? And so I'm in a system where they have remained mostly a white, male, middle-aged Protestant. You can actually like design the perfect legislator if they keep it up. I think what I do well is this new class of really progressive people is saying that we need to disrupt that, right? That's not representative of our Commonwealth. And I loved how you mentioned about Massachusetts lies to itself about being progressive and liberal and blue, and it's kept it up, right? And it's very deeply purple. A lot of our legislators who even call themselves Democrats are not. And so often the time we're sort of positioned to fight Republican versus Democrat, when actually, in some cases, sadly, there might be a moderate Republican, I know that I'm going to say this, but I really mean this, who might be more aligned with what you're fighting for than sometimes people who consider themselves a Democrat. And that's because we feed off our lies. You know, we like to tell ourselves these things, and because the dominant culture believes them and propagates it, we tend to be like, well, I'm from Massachusetts, we vote blue all the time. Yeah, right, okay. So I think for me, I would say what we do exceedingly well, you know, I used to be a promoter, and my number one skill in campaigning was being able to promote and advocate to my people, and that's why I set records in my race. And so I would say the combination of people like me in that dominant culture, and it's hard. I honestly today was coming here and I said, man, there should be therapy for elected officials like us, because our districts are needy. We go through trauma all the time. I mean, just want to uplift Jassy Correa for a moment, because of that victimization of a young woman of color. You know, that I felt like that was happening to me, you know, or someone in my family, like you said. So I think that the dominant structure is what's in the State House, but if we can break it down, the good news is that there are people fighting the good fight.
Thank you.
So with all of the issues that we have with our criminal justice system, what is one issue in particular that sticks out to you, and what is the solution that you see for that issue, essentially?
So I mentioned my brother was killed in August 20th, 2017, and I've been a youth worker and a community worker for a very long time. I always thought that I had been doing the right thing. I hired thousands of young people in my history. I have gone and got kids into college. I thought I did everything right. You know, like I went to college, I came back to my community when I could have went anywhere in the world after graduating from Wellesley. And I was really confronted with a huge challenge once my brother was killed, because I felt like I had let him down and let my family down, because here I was trying to save my city and the world, and I couldn't even save him. And I'm confronted with something as this case is beginning around parole and life without parole, because the young man who killed him is probably going to be up against some cases. Sorry, I got lost there for a second. But just thinking about the young man who even killed my brother, I mean, people might think that that's a really weird way to think about that, but empathizing with him and his family is that if he is charged with first-degree murder, that he probably will be sent to jail for the rest of his life. And so I, in my first week on the job, along with Senator Brownsberger, put forward a bill about ending life without parole, and I think that that is humane to fight that. And so even though I'm challenged with it in my personal life to think about what's going to be like when I stand up and give my impact statement about giving this young man a chance after 20 years because he killed my brother, right? And so I think we're mostly, I would say for criminal justice, looking at the arc of justice and also looking at moral values is something that I think about when I think about fighting for justice. And I really am touched about when you look at your son. I don't have children, but I think about if my brother was the one on the other side of that case, how would I fight for him? And so I would say that parole and looking at sentencing biases, particularly Community is something that I am fighting for on both sides.
Out of all of the issues within our criminal justice system, what is one that sticks out to you the most, and what solution do you see for that problem?
Okay. So as I stated, I got a brother that's behind the walls at MCI Norfolk. His name is Fuquan. He has done 21 years in prison, and you know, he actually, because of where we are in the state, because of the organizing that has been happening, you know, from organizers along with legislators like Rep. Miranda, we have brothers that can write bills from behind the walls, and we have actual legislators that are sponsoring these bills and trying to put it into legislation. So with that being said, I think that there's a bill that definitely needs to be addressed, and there's an issue, structural racism within the system. The system is FUCK'd up, and we need to address it. And in order to do that, we need to really organize as a collective and put all of the egos and the organizational missions aside to try to hone in on one specific issue to address that. And I believe that this bill that my brother wrote could actually do that. Now, the bill I'm gonna give you all, the structure of it does not work. Now, this bill was just pushed through legislation so it can make it at least to the conference committee, which it just got appointed to conference committees. And so this bill is House Bill 1440. So if you want to write that down, I got you.
Yeah, I'll write that down. I'm just going to stop you a bit because when we conclude at the end, I'm going to give everyone a chance to speak on the initiatives that they have right now.
Okay.
So, and plus for the time. So.
All right. So let me just close out real quick with saying structural racism is something that we need to address because that's the fundamental foundation of the criminal injustice system, which has affected numerous Black and brown people across our country.
And I'm actually going to skip over you guys because Ayana actually has to head out. So I don't know if you want to give a last word before you.
Yeah, so I think one of the most, well, it's kind of hard to, but I guess for the forefront of my mind right now is just thinking of like the conditions of confinement in the DOC right now, and like my personal beliefs, and I know some people here today, is just like I don't believe in prisons and things like that, but like, you know, while we're working for that world, like there are like real conditions right now that are really ugly and that are killing our family members, and you know, whether it's the brown water or the 23-hour lockdowns, or you know, still shackling women as they're giving birth, even though there was a bill that was passed, rodents in the cells. Like there's just so much that are going on, and like, you know, the DOC wants to keep our people accountable, but no one's keeping them accountable. It's just like a big like black hole. Like we don't know, like, and like I'm visiting someone too, a friend. His name is Derek Washington. He was transferred to Max Souza, and like the non-contact visits, like, you know, whatever, the glass and stuff, but there's not even like you know, the telephones or anything, like it's just ripped out and it's a patch. So the first time I visited him, I thought it was like a microphone patch, but no, it's just a patch where the phone used to be. So like we're like just yelling through like the glass, and we could like barely hear each other. And you know, I've written letters to the DOC, and like, you know, I just feel like people in power like to deflect power. Like they're just like, oh, you know, if we're like trying to advocate for things, like they'll be like, oh, like I'm a prosecutor, I don't have that much power, the judge does. And then like if we go to the DA is like, you know, so there's just so much going on, and then it's just like, I don't know, we just really need to figure out how to hold these people accountable. And I have flyers and stuff, I'll just leave over there. I'm really sorry again that I have to like.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Which prison was it? Without which prison?
Souza Burnell.
Souza, yeah.
And I'll jump in.
Hey, tell Derek I said what up.
I'll jump back to Gabrielle. Before I do that, I will let you guys know we got news today at Cut 50 that Georgia actually just got their dignity bill passed today that actually prevents the shackling of women, pregnant women who are incarcerated. So they got that passed today.
I'll talk a lot about reentry later, but I think, first of all, it's really hard to choose one thing. I think for all of us that we think that needs to be defects in the system, but definitely our pretrial bail system. I don't know how aware people are of this, but the House of Corrections, our jails across the state now, have the majority of their population is pretrial, is people that have not yet been sentenced or found guilty of a crime. They have about 60%, depending on the facility and depending on the day, of people that are pretrial. And that's been a change. It used to be the majority of their population was sentenced. So I think a system where somebody who has money but may be dangerous or violent or a risk to public safety, and somebody and can get out of jail, and someone who doesn't have money, not violent, not a risk to public safety, not dangerous, can't get out of jail, then that's a problem. And I think people are really starting to focus on it. I think last year's legislation allowed the expansion of diversion, but it didn't mandate it. And I think a lot of other states have looked at mandated diversion and have looked at alternatives to people being held in jail pre-trial. And I know we have people that speak very passionately about it in our state. Our city council president, Andrea Campbell, her twin brother died while being held as a pretrial detainee while awaiting a sentence. So I think it's really important to look at those examples, to look at how many people are being held in our jails for our $500 to $1,500 bail, that if they had $1,500 would be in the community and wouldn't have their lives disrupted in that way.
Same.
So CFGJ has 6 issues. If I say them all in one sentence, does that count? No? Okay, so I'll actually, if I can stretch a little, I do want to talk about one thing that one of our priorities, but also something we want to make sure you guys know to fight against. And Gabrielle, I want to actually dig you out off of that. So one thing we want to work on is expungement. So for records of young people, if they have a record of something before they turn 21, you can expunge it. That can only be one case, that's it, nothing more, and it cannot be one of 150 offenses that a lot of the young people actually have on their record. So that bill was passed all by young people knocking on the doors and taking it, pushing this legislation, and not one of them is eligible for expungement. So what we want to say is we want to expand expungement that Keturah mentioned earlier, so that we want to say, if a young person hasn't reoffended within 3 to 5 years, and do not make a blanket exclusion for all these offenses, then you want to give them a fighting chance to actually have expungement and have not the record define them for the rest of their life. The one thing I do want to make sure you guys all know to fight against, one of the first bills the governor filed when he came in, and something he campaigned on, was this ability to expand pre-trial diversion. If you can't do it on bail, let's do it under dangerousness. So if you hear anything around dangerousness hearings, the governor's proposal basically gives prosecutors 100% power of who is going to be incarcerated, taking it out of the courts, taking it out of all the players who say, how can we reduce the number of young people or adults who are incarcerated. They can say at any point in a trial, we think they're dangerous, can we hold them until we figure it out, and it can be up to 120 days or plus. And this is just because a prosecutor decided to do that. So I just want to give this a heads up for all of you, because that might be a big fight for us this session.
As I mentioned earlier, we are, I Have a Future is pushing for the juvenile expungement bill. But what I'm going to talk about is the raise the age bill, as we like to call it. And so what raised the age, currently in the state of Massachusetts, the cutoff age for juveniles to be brought into that jurisdiction is 17 years old. Now you can imagine that, what we're trying to do is increase the age so that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are a part of that juvenile system. In the adult system, young people do not get the resources that they need so that when they do come out, they are able to be, productive citizens in society. And so young people are still learning, they're still developing, they're still growing. There is no reason why 17, 18, 19-year-olds shouldn't be considered young people. Right. And as a state, we need to do better. Right. So, yeah, that's the bucket.
Thank you. So I would like you guys to talk a little bit about what your vision of justice is. What does that look like to you?
So I can start. So this is something that I think a lot about, and it's also a part of my learning growth area. I'm like leaning on my sisters at Sisters Unchained, but I believe in the abolishment of prisons. I want to live in a society where we get back to a point where we don't need the prison industrial complex or police system. So if we want to talk a little more.
That's a tough one. Another thing I keep thinking about. I'm not gonna have. This is gonna be the one I don't have a good answer for, because when we talk about in our justice system, there's a victim and then there's a offender, and it's a very clear line. You can only be one or the other. But most people are not one or the other. So many people who have offended have been hurt, and many people who have been victims have been the ones who have hurt. It just depends on when you were caught. And the thing is, when we have a society that this is who we are, humans. We suck. This is what we do. But we also have growth. We also have healing. And how do you measure all that? Because when I'm ready for something bad, I can do better now. The next person isn't ready. It's like, no, I'm still at the hurting point. I'm not ready for the reconciliation. And it's something how do we do this? And we have a legal system that we have to work within. It's constantly a question what would be the ideal society? It's like sort of, it's not in focus yet for me, but these are the factors.
And I'll add, I think alongside restorative justice is the importance of procedural justice. There's a lot of research on this, both on the juvenile justice side as well as the adult justice side, is that if people perceive that they were treated fairly, then they will look different at the result. And a really good example that I think about, and this is throughout the system, by the police, by the courts, in jails and in prisons and reentry. I think about when I was working in the juvenile justice system in Utah, and there was a detention facility, and we were there talking to these 4 young men that were being held in detention. And when we say detention, youth jail. This is not after school detention. This is a youth prison. And they were being held there, all 4 of them. They had 2 different judges. So 2 kids had come before one judge. The other 2 kids had come before another judge. They all had the same sentence. They were all in detention. But 2 kids felt like the judge had listened to them and had made them part of the process and had asked them about what had happened in their lives and what had led them to that point. And the other 2 kids said, the judge didn't even look me in the eye, didn't even want to talk to me. And the 2 sets of kids that we were talking to had completely different opinions of the system and the process that they had been through. 2 of the kids thought, I messed up and this is my consequence. And I now know what I did wrong. And when I get out, I'm going to change. And the other 2 kids were like, this is not fair. I wasn't listened to. I shouldn't even be here. I don't know why I'm here. And so just seeing, people that were in the exact same circumstance and have such different opinions about it because of the procedure and the way that they got there and the fairness, which I think goes alongside restorative justice, I think was really impactful. And I think people knowing that in our system can change or adjust the way that we work to be mindful of that so that people have a voice the same way they will with the restorative justice process.
That's good. Thank you.
To be truthful, I actually wanted to defer this question to my brother Dom.
Okay,
if you are open to speak to it.
What's the question again?
What is your vision of restorative justice?
How I would like to see it is the vision, right?
Yes.
So basically what everybody up here is saying, we got to abolish the system. Restorative would mean the only restoration comes if a person chooses to do it on themselves. With components that is for you, it's imperative for you to embark on a journey to better yourself. All of my incarceration, everything from day one was me wanting to be who I am now. So I took steps to, to work myself. But I've seen plenty of people who play basketball all day, gym all day, and they don't have to do anything. So a system of restoration that can't be if they're allowed to do nothing that works on themselves each and every day. So the system is a fallacy, and it has to be an individual individual journey. And basically, a quote by Malcolm X is, in the head of the world, every day, he seconds prison as a place to go if somebody wanted to do something. He said, if motivated in prison, a prisoner could change their life. But if motivated, that's yourself. Yourself's the motivation. The COs don't make you wake up. It's not like down south, chain gang, and all of that. Up here is you can do what you want. The choice is yours. So somebody goes in with 10 years, they come home. In 10 years, they didn't do one thing different. Nothing worked on them. Not hurt somebody the next time, or not go feed their family from the options that they thought they had. Nothing gets addressed. So it would just have to be more of what the sister said about responsibility. It would have to be some system put in place where there's some steps that they create to where they want to be and visualize where they want to be, and those components be factored in to be able to help them facilitate whatever their will is.
Right, and real quick, just to, I mean, I think that the system should, offer spaces that allow that, you know what I mean? Because our system is all about punishment and capitalism as well. But it's all about punishment. There is no growth. Unless you have the motivation to be like, yo, I want to grow, I want to change, I want to do better. But if you don't have that, that's not the type of environment that space was created for.
Right.
It's all about punishment. Because of that, you got people that are hurting, that are traumatized, that are victimized, that have lost family members, that have lost people right in front of them, and we expect for them to be restorative. We expect for them to come out and be okay and just enter back into society. Like, nah, we need to, in order to have motivated individuals, you can have brothers like Dom that's motivated, that can sit down and take care of themselves internally, and make sure that they get themselves ready to transition out. But then the way that the system is set up, the space is not there for brothers to really even partake into, being mentally motivated.
I'd answer this in two parts. I'm a state rep, and so there's like some things that I'm supposed to do and things that I guess I just add to my plate because I feel like it. But there was a situation with a pizza shop in Boston, Upham's Corner House of Pizza, and a group of young people. It went viral, and I decided to step in once the pizza shop, who has had a history of some insensitive practices, said that they were going to press charges against the young people. And then when I heard community members say they were going to burn the place down, right? I remembered at 14, I learned some mediation practices, and it stuck with me. I'm 38 years old for 24 years. And I decided to step in and say, hey, can I help change a business, keep them in business by improving their practices because our community wants, better practices, and keep these young people out of trouble, right? And I found it so crazy because people were like, what are you doing? I was creating a restorative space, a space where we could come together to address an issue that didn't have to be dealt with in the court system or the School of Hard Knocks. And so the way that I want to answer this question is that we do not live in a peaceful society that champions restoration, right? It's not in our churches, it's not in our schools, it's not in our workplaces. And so therefore, we're trying to create restorative justice practices in a system that wasn't built on that, but we don't even live those practices. And so when people ask me what vision I have for restorative justice, is that we actually make that a practice in our society. Like, I forgive you, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I don't need to penalize you. And the case, I want to bring up the case recently with Jassy Correa. Even online, we are blaming and shaming a victim and penalizing her for what was done to her. And I think that that's something that society has to learn. So when I think about restorative practices, I think that there's a place for that in all pieces of society. And so when I look at, even when I day-to-day life, I think about where am I bringing about peace in my family and in my community, not just as a legislator or a person fighting for criminal justice reform, that we actually have to start living those practices. And part of it's because we don't know them. You know, we have had hundreds of years of shame and blame and penalization, and so what we find hard is even this day-to-day kind of like, I know you didn't mean to hurt me, right? And so how can we do that in our communities? So that's how I would answer that.
That's awesome, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about an initiative around expungement. I know that that's something that you're very passionate about, and I know that you're passionate about it, you're passionate about it.
I'm passionate about it
Everybody's
too.
passionate about it. And I just want to talk about really how that would impact the youth in our city. From my standpoint, from what I've seen, is that a lot of our adults, they get involved in they get into our criminal justice system at a young age, and it kind of just lingers and follows them. A record kind of lingers and follows them, and it also, in a sense, prevents you from having really hope for your future, a hope for being able to do something different with yourself, or even being able to be looked at as something different. And so, as I was organizing this event, I actually did some research on a bill that was passed in Pennsylvania, the Clean Slate Act. And what that bill does is, if you have a misdemeanor and you've come home and after 3 years of not having recidivism, which is after not having any other further involvement with the law, they would automatically expunge your record. And if you have a nonviolent felony, it would do the same thing after 5 years. And so when I thought about that, and I thought about our city and our youth in our city and the impact that that could have, I really wanted to make the focus of this event tonight to talk about our youth and talk about how we can come together and unify and support these organizations, our state rep as well, and getting a bill passed here that can potentially do that for us.
I would say that there's a couple things that are important to know about expungement. I think our community's education on what it means to seal your records and what it means to expunge your records. Two, I've been sharing a lot of information. It is cost prohibitive for some people to work on getting their records expunged, because one of the issues I find is that it's not necessarily the first fee, but if you have to hire an attorney to help you expunge your record, not only may not have the funds, but you may not have the information on how to do that. And then thirdly, for people that have been, it's a traumatic experience dealing with courts and lawyers and prisons, and I find some homies like honestly just don't want to deal with that. And so the fact that they have to go back into a courtroom or go back with legal counsel to fight for essentially the erasure of what's on their record is prohibitive, right? And so I personally am on a mission. Besides providing information about free expungement at Dorchester Court and Roxbury Court a couple times a month, Greater Boston Legal Services has lawyers there to help you get on track to expunge. So I share that widely, and I do that often because people are on Facebook and they can see it, and if it wasn't on there, they might not be able to see it.
Right.
But I'm on a mission. We are about to enter into a $1 billion industry. Actually, we already have with cannabis. And I'm personally trying to work on getting the legislature to really think about expunging non-violent marijuana cases. California is doing that. We need to do that. It's not fair that people are entering our communities and building weed businesses, and there's a lot of young men with non-violent cases in our prison system. In California, in some cases, hundreds of people a day, or 47, and they haven't shown that that's increased crime. And I think Massachusetts needs to do right by the communities in which they've done wrong by. And so when it comes to expungement, besides sharing information, I want to make sure that when it's time for people to go to the State House to fight for these things, or to call your legislator, because we all live in different places, and sometimes, I will say this, it only takes about 5 phone calls and 8 emails, if that, to get your legislator to act. Right? And so whether that's Situate, whether it's Provincetown or Dorchester or Worcester, what we have to do is not only hold people of color in elected office accountable, we have to hold other people accountable. So that might mean just calling or emailing that person to say you care about the issue, and it goes a long way. So that's what I'm focused on, particularly with expungement.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know.
Let's talk about your bill.
Okay, great. That's even better. So going back to the bill is a bill to enact to establish a special commission to address structural racism, and the goal of the bill is to create a joint petition to have a federal and state agency investigated on this racial inequities in the Massachusetts court system. I mean, as I stated, I think this shouldn't just happen just in Massachusetts. I think it should happen all across the country. But I think that, you know, seeing that we're progressive, we can start something here and really try to take initiative and lead on it here. But with this bill, the structure of it, as I stated in the first place, the structure of it within this bill right now is not the bill that we really want to push forth through legislation. The structure of it is actually all the appointees of this bill are the same folks that have a job to incarcerate and continue to keep people like us incarcerated. So with that being said, a call to action would be to, one, understand what this bill is really trying to do. Well, not this bill, but what the organizing of myself, my brother Fuquan, who's behind the walls, what we're trying to do is to get people to understand that smoke. So what I mean by smoke is, how many people know if you got smoke, you know what it is? Put your hand in there. Okay. All right. So we know about smoke of people that we may have issues with, you know, hoods that we may have issues with. But what about people that are writing legislation and then writing policies that are crippling Black and brown communities? You know, that's your smoke?
Real smoke.
That's the real smoke. Because the reason why our brothers and sisters are fighting one another is because there's laws, policies, and practices that have been embedded in our communities that are getting us to fight against each other, and is causing us to hurt one another. And in order for us to heal, we need to start fighting back. And the way that we fight back is to, one, find one commonality, understanding that, yes, there's structural racism that's happening within our system. Two, understand how do we really organize around that. And three, really show what power is and how we can really change, right? And the way that we do that is by really getting our people involved. So a lot of us talk about it, but nothing will be done until we act on it. And so we can remain in this system that continues to perpetuate Black and brown people in our communities, or we can do something about it and not remain stuck on replay. So be on the lookout for Know Your Smoke, hashtag Know Your Smoke campaign. And just if you want to continue to follow us at Stuck on Replay, you can literally just Google it, Facebook it, Instagram it, Twitter it, whatever you want to call it. We are there. We've been in slow motion over the past few months, but we will be back in action, really trying to engage people that look like us to really tackle this issue around structural racism. And we need brothers and sisters to call their legislature to say, hey, we need to be at this hearing, and we need to share how this actual structure of this commission within this bill is not going to work. And there needs to be a lot of languages that needs to be changed in this bill in order for it to look like the way we want it to look like, and not what they want it to look like. And I say they as folks that have been holding and harnessing all the power within this state house and the criminal injustice system.
I will defer my time to these two ladies because I know they're both working on specific expungement legislation.
So, there is a bill. I keep looking at my phone because there's a number. So it's House Bill 1386 and Senate Bill 900. Both of them are identical. It doesn't matter which one. They both do the same thing. This is the expungement bill that we have been talking about that would expand opportunities for expungement. That's really all my ask. There's a few more that we'll do the follow-up. But I want to mention one thing that Ayana mentioned, how the system is about breaking up families. There's something in expungement that we have been working on, and has not come up a lot in but it's pretty, it follows the same theme. So for some records, you could, when the representative talked about there's a difference between sealing and expungement, with sealing, there's more confidentiality, but there's certain players that will always see your record, no matter what. Law enforcement, the courts, DCF, early education, any agency that works with young people. Because we work on behalf of young people who are at risk of juvenile justice involvement, our population starts at birth. And what we know is kids who are involved in the child welfare system, especially if they have been removed from their families, that removal increases their likelihood of entering the justice system, juvenile or adult criminal justice system. One thing that protects young people, we do two things that do need to do this removal, but in some cases you do have to remove removal. That removal is a trauma for young people, but then once you bounce from foster home to foster home, that causes, and this might be a trigger, so sorry. For some young people, for young people, if they bounce so many times, that the cause of this bouncing from foster home is so bad on young people, it's worse than the original abuse or neglect, including if it was sexual abuse. That bouncing harms them more. One thing that protects young people, if they can remain for their stability and to help to prevent that actual harm, is if they're removed from their families, but they can stay with extended family. Those kids, they are removed, but they're still connected to their community, connected to their family, connected to their heritage. They are much more likely to be protected from the harms of the system. Guess who cannot be foster parents to their own nephews and nieces? People who have a record, even if it's a juvenile record, even if the case said dismissed. So when we talk about all sorts of things and access to employment, access to all this, this is one population because it's a hidden population, but it's a big one because when we say we cannot expunge those records, we are harming these same exact kids that we are saying we want to protect. That's my soapbox. So the same about the number.
Before Couture goes, if anybody wants to know any bills, most of that stuff is public information. It's just that people don't know. So I can make sure and make some of this available to Victoria, and then she can share it out with the network, because you can literally find out any bill that has been, there was about 6,000 bills put forth this session, or any one of your legislators, which ones they filed and which one they've co-sponsored actually on the web. Okay.
So I Have a Future has just launched a larger vision. We have calculated that if over 40,000 people can commit to moving on the issues, most of the issues that we talked about today, then that is the margin in which we can shift change in the state of Massachusetts. So our goal is to have 40,000 people to commit to being an I Have a Future dreamer, a voter, right? We believe that. So right now, our focus is to target young people at the age of 16, because by 2022, they will be of age to vote, and in turn can lead the future. And so, yeah, if you want to learn more about that movement that we've launched, you can find it on our social media platforms as well. And then the other token that I want to leave you all with is the Raise the Age bill. So the number for that bill is House number 3420 and Senate number 825. So please call your legislator. Make sure that they are aware that this is something that they need to prioritize. Last year we were able, I believe it was briefly mentioned, but we were able to shift the juvenile age from 7 to 12 years old just last year. So if more folks are able to become aware of this and pass the information down, then we'll be one step closer to our goal.
So real quick, I know that a lot of us are like giving you all asks, like this is what we would ask for you all to do, right? And I think what's extremely important and imperative, you know, even through the process of me organizing and learning a lot, is understanding the process of how stuff gets pushed through legislation and how to actually effectively organize. And there is a process of like what it looks like to get bills passed through legislation. And because of the way this state is, it takes stuff a long time to really get passed. But if you organize effectively and you understand what the process is when a bill is when you hand a bill to a legislator and ask for them to sponsor. Then if they agree to sponsor, they get co-sponsors. And then once they get co-sponsored, it has to sit until it gets until the legislatures get put in the committees. Once the legislators gets put in their committees, like Rep. Miranda says, she's in the criminal injustice committee. Then it gets distributed to the committees. Now it's time to work on the assignment of where there's a hearing, that a public hearing that takes place sometime in April or May, which that's the important time for the community to have their voices heard, because if you're not at the table when that hearing is happening, then you're not at the table when that bill or that bill needs to push through legislation. So there's a number of steps of processes that we need to truly understand in order to make sure that the bill that we're asking about and trying to fight for is pushed through legislation. And I think that's extremely important for the community to know and understand, because a lot of us are giving y'all ask and y'all like, all right, I'm gonna call my legislator. All right, I'm gonna email my legislator. All right, what was that bill number? Okay, so what am I doing? Like, we really need to understand that, because guess who has mastered that? They've created it and have mastered that to keep it away from us, so we won't continue to allow our people to organize, mobilize, and really build true power within this injustice system.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of James, one other point I want to say is that he's exactly right. Like, our system has flourished in making sure that we aren't educated and equipped to be activated. And so I Have a Future is hosting community nights where we are holding workshops to inform folks on how to get involved on a deeper level. And you can also find that on our social medias.
All right. Well, I think that that kind of concludes and wraps up for the evening tonight. I will say that for me, over the years, I have always had the question in my mind, like, what is being done in our community to make change? And from the outside looking in, it seems simple. It seems like, logically, why don't we just go and push a bill, or why don't we just go and speak to our legislators and make a loud enough cry in order to get things done. But when you actually get involved and you see all that it takes in order to get bills pushed through, all of the persistence it takes, you realize that there are people and there are organizations, I mean, it's represented right here, that are really doing the work, but it's a hard battle, it's a tough fight, and it's not something that happens overnight. And so if we as a community can commit to supporting these initiatives, at first I was someone that kind of felt like I didn't necessarily have anything to give to certain causes or to certain initiatives, like it wasn't my lane. I didn't have the background, and so therefore I didn't necessarily have a voice in that space. And just from my own frustration, I kind of pushed myself out of that space and said, you know what, I might not have the background, but I have a yes. And so the whole idea tonight is not to just encourage you and not to just empower you, but also to move you to action, so that the next time that these organizations need you to come out, you come out. The next time that you hear and you see something taking place, you spread the word yourself, and you show up, because when you show up, it matters. So that's pretty much.
Social media handles, because that's the way that we organize it, right, these days. So I'd love to get social media handles, and also there's some free T-shirts, right?
Yep. So I'm actually gonna do a little spiel. So I actually wanted this gentleman right here, Frank Marvel, to speak. He is actually the artist behind these beautiful pieces that are decorating the room, and I wanted to actually have him talk a little bit about the work that he does with students in our city. Because he really, really embodies what it is to have empathy and to care about your community. You want to just
I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I'm better with paints and colors. But I see a lot of positive thinking, a lot of positive actions and good goals that are on the table. And when I see people working together like tonight, mentioning everybody, I mean, that's the base of my work. I repeat every day, more love is okay, and I see it here, accepting what is good, accepting what is positive, and your work, unbelievable.
Thank you. Same back.
I was connected, and love is in this room, and I work with young students, and the idea is to understand basically what they're feeling and what they want it to be, paying attention to the details. And tonight, I heard a lot of all the speakers tonight talking a lot about a lot of good goals. And at the same time, we were listening to somebody tonight, and that is very important. The connection, it has to be there. So working together on a room, that's what is all my work about. So connecting. And so let's keep being out there, working together. And one of the things that I do and say all the time is like, let's keep creating projects that bring people together. And that's the most important part. So, thank you. I have a lot of stickers. I call it reminders. And they say more love is okay. So basically, let's keep that in mind. And because we easily get confused and forget about this topic. So,
Thank you.
So this
All right,
food
thanks.
game.